Firming India's post-Operation Sindoor posture, New Delhi has signaled that any future mass casualty or high-visibility terror strike traced to Pakistan-based groups will invite prompt, precise, and limited, but unambiguous punishment that does not distinguish between the trigger pullers and their state backers, with the operational intent to erode militant capacity, degrade enabling nodes inside Pakistan's security ecosystem, and impose costs under the nuclear threshold while retaining escalation control. The doctrinal throughline that emerged after Sindoor is straightforward: calibrated conventional force, cross-domain integration, flexible response options, and tempo-driven shock designed to close the sanctuary gap militants have enjoyed across the line of control and the international boundary, while keeping the campaign bounded in time, geography, and targets to preserve crisis stability, minimize civilian harm, and leave space for diplomatic off-ramps once military objectives are achieved. For a next attack scenario, the target palette would be built around 4 concentric sets. First, direct perpetrators and their infrastructure. Second, their command, control, and training ecosystem. Third, the state enablers that make such terrorism combat effective. And fourth, the pressure levers that signal strategic reach without collapsing into general war, sequenced by intelligence certainty, collateral mitigation, and escalation ladders. At the core of the initial wave would be precision strikes on the perpetrators' identifiable facilities, including leadership safehouses, training camps, intake points, explosives fabrication sites, UAV launch and recovery nodes, and logistics caches co-located with ostensibly civilian structures, but segregated by SAAW-confirmed militant usage patterns. In practical terms, these aimpoints sit within a belt historically spanning Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and northern and central Punjab, with legacy footprints in Mansehra, Balakot axes, Muzaffarabad, Kotli corridors, and urban peripheries where safehouses blend into low-rise neighborhoods, yet betray signatures like irregular night traffic, comms discipline bursts, and unusual supply cycles. To compress the decision to strike window, India would lean on fused ISR, standoff element SIGINT, high-resolution SAR and EO satellite passes with tip-and-queue logic, long-dwell male UAV or high-altitude pseudo-satellite observation, and cyber-aided pattern-of-life reconstruction. Then prosecute with standoff air-delivered PGMs and surface-launched missiles to minimize aircraft exposure to air defenses. The munitions mix would likely include Spice Series glide kits with scene-matching algorithms to defeat GPS jamming, Crystal Maze derivatives, or equivalent man-in-the-loop EO-guided munitions for terminal discrimination in cluttered terrain, Hammer AASM kits for modular warheads and variable ranges when launch geometry is constrained, and indigenous options like SAAW for hardened, compact aimpoints, where a 120 kg class penetrator can neutralize nodes without wide-area blast. In valleys or built-up edges where line of sight is compromised, and cloud cover-heavy, SAR-referencing weapons and IIR seekers would be prioritized to maintain SEP within single-digit meters. Sortie plans would lay a seed dead in thin footprints. Anti-radiation missiles like Rudram series, cued to emitting radars, MALD-like decoys if required to saturate tracking, and escort jammers synchronizing with onboard AESA ECM to keep the strike package lean and the exposure brief. Concurrently, the second band of targets would go after the connective tissue, comms relays, safe route logistics depots, mid-tier trainers, and cadre marshalling points that transform raw recruits into operational cells. These are often dispersed across rural compounds, madrasa-adjacent properties used irregularly, or agricultural outbuildings masking fuel, ammonium nitrate derivatives, and RCIED components. Because these nodes can be moved quickly, timing is critical. India's approach would favor time-on-target coordination across multiple districts in the same cycle to paralyze movement and force militants into flight, where follow-on shots with loitering munitions or rapid retaskable standoff weapons can prosecute fleeing assets along pre-identified egress routes. Where non-kinetic options achieve more with less risk, e.g., SIGINT-driven comms takedowns, spoofing to isolate cells, or brief, reversible power disruptions to specific feeders known to support clandestine facilities. Those will be employed to set up kinetic hits with cleaner PID and smaller warheads. For sites embedded in dense civilian grids, man-in-the-loop weapons or very low yield, delayed fuse penetrators reduce blast, spall, and fragment throw. If the pattern of life still shows unacceptable collateral risk, cyber or precision sabotage may substitute kinetics to achieve functional kill without detonation. The third-tier state enablers marks the real doctrinal shift. India's signals after Sindoor made it plain that intelligence, logistics, training, and protection provided by elements within Pakistan's security architecture are now part of the legitimate target system if a future attack crosses preset Indian thresholds. In practice, this does not mean sweeping strikes on major cantonments. Those would be escalatory. Rather, it means surgical pressure on discrete enabler nodes, frontier corps or rangers outposts with documented facilitation of infiltration corridors, perimeter checkpoints that allow arms transit, plausible deniable transport assets used to shuttle cadres, and low-visibility training ranges used by militant proxies under the cover of local auxiliaries. Such nodes are usually lightly defended, outside dense air defense umbrellas, and located near rugged terrain that allows standoff engagement from Indian airspace or shallow penetrations of minutes, not tens of minutes. Weapon selection would emphasize low RCS delivery platforms and inertial EO terminal guidance to cope with GNSS denial and to prove post-strike verifiability via BDA imagery. To underscore the punitive link, India may pair kinetic strikes with public declassification of ISR snippets, masked for sources and methods, showing the precise enabler activity, thereby tying the action to factual conduct and denying the narrative space for blanket denials. The fourth band, pressure levers, keeps options that signal depth without breaking the crisis ladder. These include striking rear-area militant finance or facilitation nodes in cities through surgical tools, interdicting specific cross-border smuggling pipelines by destroying vehicle pools and clandestine storage at border-proximate yards, and hitting UAV launch hubs tied to cross-border drops. At sea, the credible threat of maritime interdiction inside India's EEZ and beyond, not commerce raiding, but targeted stops of suspect logistics craft, compels the adversary to reroute and slows their operational tempo. In the cyber domain, India may impose time-bounded disruptions on select communications backbones, surveillance feeds, or financial conduits connected to proxy operations, calibrated to be reversible and narrow, thereby avoiding indiscriminate effects while still degrading the adversary's coordination. Across these levers, the theme is the same: controlled, legally defensible action that ties directly to the chain of facilitation. The platforms that make this executable under short notice are not hypothetical. They are the quick reaction backbone India built and rehearsed in increments since Uri and Balakot, then normalized during Sindoor. On the air side, Su-30 MKI and Rafale formations provide the heavy strike with long-range AAM cover and deep magazine for PGMs. Mirage 2000 ITH units add proven precision delivery with Spice and Popeye-class inventories. Jaguar DAIN III can contribute for specific low-level TOS profiles if required, though the trend line favors higher standoff for survivability. The Rafale Spectra suite, AESA radar, and Meteor plus Mica MIR combination ensure air dominance along ingress corridors, reducing the adversary's intercept prospects to short windows. Coupled with low observable terrain masking and time-on-target coordination, the strike packages remain transient on Pakistan's radar picture. Standoff missiles like Scalp can prosecute hardened or deeply recessed targets with pinpoint accuracy from safe launch ranges, while the expanding Rudram anti-radiation missile family suppresses localized SAAW threats that light up to contest the raid. The IAF's AEW and C, particularly Netra Mk1 and Falcon, extend situational awareness and deconflict the air picture, while aerial refueling from IL-78 MKI or newer tankers stretches station time for CAPs safeguarding the strike egress. From ground forces, the Pralay quasi-ballistic missile and BrahMos land attack cruise missile provide rapid, GPS-independent precision against fixed, well-surveyed enabler nodes, with trajectory shaping and high speed complicating interception by point defenses. BrahMos' supersonic profile and sea-skimming lineage adapted to land attack make it ideal for time-sensitive re-area nodes within a few hundred kilometers. For thicker air defenses, coordinated salvos with decays and timing offsets saturate engagement envelopes. artillery and rocket forces along the Low Sea and IB, Pinaka regiments with guided rockets, Smerch with precision projectiles, offer shallow-depth strikes against launch pads, firing positions, and infiltration facilitators minutes after detection, closing the response loop and denying militants the post-attack exfil route they have historically exploited. Special operations units, held at higher readiness, retain raid options for extremely high-value captures or demolitions where kinetic blast would risk civilians or where documentation is needed. However, such inserts are contingent on weather, tactical surprise, and exfil corridors, and would be used sparingly in the initial escalation rung. Escalation management is baked into planning assumptions. The objective is to achieve operational and narrative dominance within a 24-72-hour window, with 2 to 3 discrete strike cycles, each narrower in scope if compliance signals emerge, or broadening modestly to a predefined ceiling if obstruction or immediate retaliation occurs. Nuclear thresholds are respected by excluding large military bases, strategic C2, and critical national infrastructure, and by avoiding urban mass casualty effects. Public signaling, short, factual briefings with BDA clips, precise aimpoint descriptions, and legal rationale linked to imminent threat or continuing armed attack supports international tolerance, while quiet lines to third-party capitals are kept open to manage de-escalation once punitive objectives are met. Should Pakistan respond with shallow air or artillery reprisal, India's next step remains proportionate but firmer. Counterforce against the reprisals launch units, then a pre-briefed second layer of enabler targets deeper by tens of kilometers, still below thresholds associated with general war. If Pakistan relies on air defense attrition rather than offensive action, India raises the cost by adding selective radar and SAAW engagement radars to the target list through anti-radiation shots, degrading the defensive umbrella without destroying civilian-adjacent assets. Concrete likely targets in the first wave align to historical and current militant geography, but are filtered by ISR and legality. Expect training compounds on the peripheries of Mansehra, Balakot and Muzaffarabad tehsils that cycle cadres on small arms, fieldcraft, and basic explosives, intake houses in Rawalakot, Kotli belts used for pre-infiltration staging, safe houses in the southern fringes of Pakistani Punjab cities where facilitators host outbound cells, fabrication dens that assemble IED main charges and triggers using dual-use stocks, and UAV hubs that have supported cross-border drops of small arms, grenades, and narcotics funding, where patterns show overlap with state-linked protection, like selective curfews around nights of movement, suspicious exemptions at local checkpoints, or repeat vehicle IDs traced to auxiliary forces. The enabler node connected to that pattern moves up the target list. Small perimeter outposts that have been implicated in green corridor creation through historical intercepts or ISR face precision neutralization. A strike to disable the watchtower, the comms hut, or the vehicle pool, not to raise the installation. Logistics barns serving as covert transshipment for ammonium nitrate, cortex, or detonators get targeted with penetrators timed to minimize secondary blast. Along the Low Sea, firing positions and launch pads identified through counter-battery radars and MLRS trajectories are struck by precision rockets within minutes. If those positions are co-located with civilian dwellings, the effectors are switched to loitering munitions with positive identification mandates. In a second cycle, if required, India broadens to command-level facilitators, known mid-tier controllers who allocate funds, weapons, and personnel across sectors, often rotating through guest houses in Abbottabad, Haripur, or Chakwal, Jhelum peripheries. Such targets are often mobile, so engagement relies on man-in-the-loop weapons fired from standoff distances after ISR confirms presence and separation from non-combatants. Switches to non-kinetic options, like coordinated arrests through intelligence partners, asset freezes via quiet legal instruments, or cyber disruption of their comms, may be executed in parallel to fragment networks. The message remains consistent. There is no shield in the seams between militant and state. The seam itself is now a vulnerability subject to precise friction. Technically, the choice of guidance and fusing matters more than platform glamour. Against walled compounds with reinforced rooms, delayed action fuses on penetrating warheads ensure interior kill without wall blowout that endangers adjacent structures. against light structures with risk of fire spread, low fragmentation, focus blast options, reduce collateral harm. In GPS-contested areas, INS midcourse with TRCOM-like or DSMAC-like terminal scene matching on Spice Scalp-class munitions keeps SEP tight. When weather occludes EOIIR, SAAW correlation steps in. In urban peripheries with narrow approach corridors, weapons with steeper terminal dives reduce lateral fragment footprint. When vertical angle is constrained, lofted release envelopes from altitude and distance balance survivability with geometry. Electronic warfare is synchronized tightly, jamming focused on acquisition radars during ingress and handoff phases, deception to paint phantom tracks away from actual axes, and emissions control on strike aircraft to shorten detect-to-engage timelines for the defender. If an intercept is attempted, escort fighters sanitize the air picture with beyond visual range engagements, leveraging high off-boresight missiles in close if needed, but the operational design aims to avoid dogfights altogether by minimizing exposure. On the ground, counter-infiltration will likely coincide with strikes. Expect surge deployment of surveillance masts, aerostats in selected valleys, portable counter-UAS at vulnerable civil nodes, and aggressive use of counter-battery radars to punish any attempt to mask militant movement with harassing fire. Border Security Force and Army units would activate pre-marked kill boxes for artillery interdiction of suspected exfil routes. If UAV drops are anticipated as reprisal, integrated air defense along the border will prioritize low-slow-small threats with layered guns, SAAW, and directed energy pilots where deployed. Railway and highway choke points inside India would quietly shift to higher alert with canine explosives detection and mobile jammer coverage to prevent follow-on attacks intended to complicate the narrative. State police anti-terror units receive target packages to scoop up dormant cells whose activation patterns correlate with cross-border triggers, attempting to reduce the domestic vulnerability window during the external strike. Diplomatically, the playbook blends firmness and boundedness. New Delhi will issue a sharply delimited public statement, naming perpetrator affiliations, the nature of sponsor facilitation, and the legal basis rooted in self-defense and necessity, paired with satellite and strike imagery demonstrating discrimination and proportionality. The window for de-escalation is kept open with a clear off-ramp, verifiable cessation of support, arrests of named facilitators, and inspection access by a mutually acceptable mechanism. If the adversary chooses tit-for-tat without addressing the enabling architecture, India's prepared third cycle expands modestly to deeper enabler nodes, specific logistics yards, communications relays tied to proxy operations, and selective radar sites that have been used to cloak proxy movement rather than national defense. The ceiling remains far below strategic targets, preserving the nuclear buffer while steadily raising costs on the state sponsor model. None of this negates the risks. Pakistan retains the ability to respond with riposte air raids, rocket artillery, or proxy escalations across other theaters. Its air defenses are layered sufficiently around key cities and bases to exact attrition if India lingers. Its political apparatus may absorb short-term costs to preserve the proxy lever it sees as strategic equalizer. That is precisely why India's doctrine centers on brevity, surprise, precision, and verifiability. The battle space is temporal as much as spatial, compressing action into hours, not weeks, limits the escalation ladder's rungs available to the other side, while posturing reserves and visible air defense readiness at home deter opportunistic retaliations on Indian cities. Cyber restraint remains important, effects stay reversible and targeted. Information operations avoid maximalist claims, sticking to demonstrable facts and imagery to maintain credibility with partners whose tacit forbearance enables repeated limited strikes without heavy diplomatic blowback. In sum, the next major attack on Indian soil that meets New Delhi's threshold would likely trigger a multi-axis, multi-cycle response that begins with precise decapitation of perpetrator infrastructure, steps into the connective enablers that give militants operational teeth, and if deterrence is not restored, rises to selective strikes on sponsor-linked state nodes implicated in facilitation, all while meticulously managing collateral, exposure, and escalation. The tools are already in place. Standoff precision weapons with scene-matching guidance to beat jamming and weather, Suppression packages that blind localized defenses long enough for time-on-target salvos, ground-based rockets and missiles that erase shallow-depth launch and staging points within minutes, and a national command rhythm that can move from ISRQ to weapons release on compressed timelines. The theory is not abstract anymore. Sindoor turned it into muscle memory. The strategic signal is unmistakable. There is no longer a protective seam between the hand that fires and the hand that supplies, trains, and shields. In the next crisis, both hands will feel the cost, swiftly, precisely, and just enough to force a choice between proxy warfare and stability without inviting a wider war that neither side can afford.